Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video. Today's video is featuring some products from the Ellen Hutson March release. A lot of the products that I showed you I actually didn't end up using, but what I did use was the lattice background, the Sweet Spring stamp and die combo, the ears to you, and the essential arches. I think that's all of them. And so we're going to jump right in. As you probably noticed from the title, we're talking about some tips on how to do multiple stampings. I'll also share with you my journey on making this card. But so my first tip is when you have a set that has a lot of pieces, parts like this, I didn't really know how I wanted to do the card. So I just figured it'd be better off to kind of stamp everything all at once. You guys, have you watched my channel? You've seen me do this before. And so basically what I'm doing is I'm putting a little bit of repositionable adhesive on the back of the set. Now, in this case, Ellen's sets actually connect so that the front and the back are connected. So I did have to use some like pixie tape just to tape the back portion of it flipped over. And then I have that repositional adhesive in the center. And then that way I can pick up the whole set at one time and stamp it down all together. A way to make this work really well without having to use a magnet to hold your things in place with your MISTI is to use the sticky mat underneath that. That's the grid that you see there. So my cardstock is being held by my sticky mat and the set is being held by repositionable adhesive. Now, I will say I did once make the mistake of grabbing the permanent adhesive, and it worked, but then I had a little bit of a hard time getting it off. So normally I can just go in with an adhesive eraser and remove it. But that time I had to use Gooby Gone. So even if you only have permanent like tape runner, you can still remove it. It'll be okay. So here I'm just pulling out my hex chart for my sketch markers. This is by Sandy Allnock. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I have one for all the markers that I have. And then that way I can start picking out some colors. Now, I will tell you that this is you'll see that there's some coloring that's gone by because originally my intention was to do a completely different card. And I will share that with you because I think it's important, especially as somebody who does this for a job, to show that sometimes things don't come together like you thought that they would. And it's okay to change direction. So everything is stamped out. I've started doing my coloring. These little flowers here, I do end up using in the final card. That's why I'm showing you here, as well as the bow. And everything, of course, will be linked below. Or if you're a person who adores still shots, you can check them out on the Ellen Hutson blog. All that information will be linked there as well. But just going in, adding some shadows, any point where two things meet or where one lays on top of the other. So for the bow, the bottom portion of the bow, where it's clearly meant to be the inside, will be darker. For the flowers, typically the base is going to be the darkest and the outside edges of your petals will be lightest. So here, these are the essential arches. This is another like kind of quick tip for if you need multiples, but you're not sure what you're going to use. So I wasn't sure what size archway I was going to use. So that's why you see me stacking 3 of them here. Now this will only work if you need the arch frame, but that is what I needed. So I just stacked 3 of them, used a piece of tape to hold them in place so I could run all of them through my die cutting machine at one time. And then this will save me time on having to go back and forth between the two. And this is is it Craft? I think it is Craft cardstock from Ellen Hutson. And so I am putting this lattice background on this other piece and I'm going to cut that out and then I will be combining the two. So here at this point you can see all of the arches that are cut out. They also have this little, because we lined them up this way, they have this little piece in between and we will actually be using the largest one of that later on when I reconfigure my card. So I have all these little cute little characters and they're all adorable. Totally love them. They're all super cute on the side. I did not use the vast majority of them. So I'll just store them with my set and I'll use them for another card. But here I wanted to use the archway to kind of create like this little garden lattice kind of look. And so I am using some adhesive to glue that to the lattice portion. And then you can actually use this one of two ways. I'm going to use the inside of it and then just trim around it with my scissors. But you could actually use the outside portion of it as well. So if you were using the outside portion, you would want to do this exact same thing that we're doing here. But then you would cut a second piece, a second archway, and then that way you could adhere it to the portion that you cut out, and you would be able to have like an outside kind of like trellis look. I hope that makes sense. Maybe it makes more sense to see it. So, here, what you're seeing is the card that I kind of had in mind beforehand. And I'm going to be honest, it just was not really feeling like me. It just wasn't really feeling my style. So how did I fix that? I walked away. I walked away and did something else for about a half an hour, and I thought about it and kind of played around with it. And then I had a much more, like, I wanted to use the pieces parts that I had, but I just wanted to change them up. So here I am using I think it's a BR72 marker. And one of the things that bothered me about the first card was that there was no dimension on my lattice. So I'm fixing that. First things first, I'm going to go in with this marker. I put the smaller part, the thinner little arch there. I colored it the same color so that it'll be darker because it will sit around it, but actually will look like it's behind. And then the other thing I'm going to do to give it dimension is, it doesn't matter which direction you pick one or the other. I chose kind of like the diagonal down towards the bottom, and then I colored that darker. And what you're going to see is it starts to look like one layer of lattice is behind the other, which is going to give it a ton more dimension. And I was much happier with that look. And then you'll see that extra dark piece that kind of goes around the back. And again, you could make this into a window. You could turn this into a bunch of other stuff. So now here's the next tip for stamping multiples. I normally put my paper down in the bottom left-hand corner. For this, you're going to want to put it in the top left-hand corner. And then you're going to want to position your stamps in kind of one line, far enough away that they can be die cut out individually, but still fit all of your pieces. And you're going to want to start at the very bottom of your cardstock. Then you can pick this up with your Misty Door and stamp it down. I'm using the same ink that I used previously. It's the Hero Arts Intensified Black ink. So I'm going to stamp these one time. I know that I need multiples of all of these images in order to build the look I'm going for. And so I moved it down just an inch. I checked to see that's not enough, so I moved it down 1.25 inches. That is enough. I will put my magnet back in place, and then I will stamp them again. I will move the paper down again 1.25 inches and stamp a third time. I could have stamped a fourth, but I actually didn't need that. I didn't need the fourth. So I just did it the 3 times. But this is immensely helpful when you need multiples versus kind of stamping out each individual one. The other reason why this is super helpful, I am going to stamp my sentiment as well. I used the Hello Spring from the ears to you, but I have to tell you that I desperately, desperately, desperately want to use the sentiment that says fresh out of clucks with the chicks. Fresh out of clucks. That's what it says. It's the best. It is literally the best. I will be using that in the future. But anywho, Hello Spring it is for today. And so now we're going to go in and do some of the coloring. Like I said, some of these I previously colored. So I'm actually going to only color 2 of these blue and 2 of these like the reddish coral color. And then the next 2 lines will be yellow and orange. Another tip for fast stamping die cutting. Color everything that is the same color at the same time. So here I'm doing both of the blue flowers, I'm doing all of the dark, then all of the midtone, then all of the light. This will cut down on the amount of time that it takes to actually color the images. And then I did the coral ones because I showed you the coral combination earlier. But here you'll really see it with the oranges. So I'm going to color this whole row orange. For the hydrangeas, I'm doing a series of dots, otherwise known as stippling. This is going to give me lots of color variation. For the two kind of swag flowers, just adding shading to the center. And then for the tulip, kind of around the bottom and then in between the lines for the tulip. And then with every one, I'm doing all the darks, all the midtones, all the lights. It makes it so much faster to get through that amount of coloring that needs to be done. You obviously do not necessarily have to do as many colors as I am doing, but I know that I wanted that color variation and that dimension. But you could definitely just color them one color or two colors and it would be fine. So that's all done. And then I'm going to move on to the next one, which is the yellows. And it's going to be the same thing again, starting with my darkest color, going to do the series of dots on the hydrangea, around the centers for the swag flowers, and then around the bottom, and then the little lines in the tulip. And I'll just go through and knock those out. It's so much faster to just do it all at one time versus switching colors and trying to color all the hydrangeas at one time or all the tulips at one time. Just knock everything that you have to color that color, just knock it out while you've got those markers out. So then the next thing that I'm going to move on to from there is I have to color the centers of the flowers. And basically I just picked a little bit of a darker golden yellow. The larger swag flowers are the only ones that need this darkest color, and I just added it to the bottom, then the mid-tone, and then the lightest color. The smaller flowers, just got the lightest color in their centers because there's no real estate there to even kind of do any shading. Then I'm going to move on to the pots. Now, I am going to tell you with the pot, I did color one in its entirety for you to see, but the only reason that I did that is because I'm filming it. If I was just doing this and I wasn't filming it as a video, I would not have colored this entirety, like this whole thing in its entirety. I would have just colored them each just like I did everything else. But I did want to show you, in order to change the tones of the pots, I did go in with a little bit of a brighter yellow to glaze the bottom one because that's how I colored my other one. But the other two are just those first three colors. For the greens, I picked 4 colors. I'm going to use 3 color combinations on each one. So for the hydrangeas and the tulips, I used the darkest green, which was a G80 in the sketch markers. And then I worked out to my lightest color, which was a G72. For the 2 swag type flowers, I used lighter colors. So in that case, my darkest color is going to be the G91 and my lightest color will be the G34. This isn't necessary. You could definitely do all the greens the same, but it just gives a little bit of nice kind of color variation to the finished card, and I'm a big fan of that. So all of those got colored exactly the same. I just showed you this the one time. From here, this is the next tip for cutting out multiples. So because we stamped them all exactly the same with the Misty, the spacing is entirely the same. I am going to pull out this long piece of pixie tape. I do stick it to my hand a couple of times to make sure it's not super sticky. I'm going to line up all of my dies, and then this is the part you have to commit to it. Like, you have to be quick about it. You can't touch one of the dies and not touch any of the other dies, but I'm going to tape them all together. And that means while I am running them through my die cutting machine, I can peel up the tape like you'll see me do here. And then I can replace all of the dies at exactly the same time. And because we stamped them exactly the same way, they will still be lined up. Such a huge time saver, especially for all of these little teeny tiny parts. Huge time saver. So now what you see over on the right hand side, I have put together my sign that says Hello Spring. I just put a little black mat around it. And then I've also put together my flowers with the pots. So I tried it without the black mat and I just didn't like it as well. And so I decided to trim down my white cardstock and then mat it on black. It just tied the sign in really nicely because I have that black sentiment with the black. I was kind of going, is it a farmhouse look? I don't know. Is that even in now? Is that even chic anymore? I don't know. But also, it doesn't matter to me. I thought it was cute. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that little garden trellis down, and then I will put the piece around it, and then we'll start adding the flowers. So with all of these kind of tips and tricks, I also just really wanted to state, like, if you are having a hard time with your card design and as you are going along, you find that it's not really working for you or it's not coming out the way that you thought it was, like, pivot. It's totally okay. Being adaptable is a super important attribute to have in life and in crafting. So when it's not coming out or it doesn't look the way that you envisioned it, like, just give yourself a break. Walk away. It doesn't mean you have to stop thinking about it or stop, like, I was kind of reworking it and like, okay, what are the elements that I like? What don't I like? As I was doing those other things for like that 30 minutes. And then when I came back to it, I had a much better vision for how it was kind of going to come together. And I like this version of my card so much better. I'm so glad that I took the break to get a little bit of perspective. So here I just added 2 little thin cardstock strips. I think they're like 1/8 of an inch, to act as my holders. You could totally use twine or thread, whatever you have laying around. I didn't want to dig out my thread, so I used this and it worked fine. And then I will put that in place, and then I will be putting my little bow over top of it so you won't see the top pieces parts of that. And then I went back and forth about whether or not to pop up the flowers on the trellis. And I realized because I was already gluing them to other pieces of cardstock, they kind of were already popped up. But I did the pot that's in the back, this one right here, I glued down flat. Well, flat-ish, because I'm gluing it on top of other cardstock. But for the other 2, I did decide to pop them up on foam tape. Not necessary, just a little added dimension to make the card more interesting. But you do whatever works for you. I feel like really often, because, and I've shared this with you guys before, just because like we do this for a living and all you ever see is the edited version, you don't necessarily see the struggle. And I think that it's super important to include the struggle because the struggle is relatable. Like, that's the truth. We all have designs that don't work out or that we have to rework. So it's not just like you alone in your craft room, especially if you're a person who doesn't have anybody else in your life that does craft. It's very hard to find somebody else who understands how you might feel about the things that don't work out. But it really does happen to all of us, and it's really just part of the creative process. It's not my favorite part. I would be willing to bet it's probably not your favorite part either, but it is part of it. And in going through those struggles and figuring out different ways to fix the things that you don't like, it helps you grow as a card maker. It helps you grow creatively, all of those things. So here I've just kind of laid out my flowers. I figured out which ones. This is when I thought I was going to pop them up. I ended up not doing that. So I could have probably just gone through and glued them all down, just like from left to right. But it was fine. Like, it ended up being fine. I just, sometimes you think you're going to pop them up and then you don't. And that's okay. It just works out that way. Here, I just had my flower just up a little bit too high and I realized I wasn't going to have any room for the orange ones. So out of all of the stamping and all of the coloring that we did, I ended up having 1 pot, 1 hydrangea, and 1 little flower swag that I didn't use. You will notice down below that some of my flowers are sharing the same pots. I don't know if that's okay because I'm not a gardener or a plant person or a botanist or any of those things, but I am a card maker and I knew that I didn't have enough room to fit in more pots. So they went in the same pot and I think they're pretty and that's all that matters. So here, just to ground my image a little bit, I'm going in with just a medium and a light gray. I am coloring right over the edge of the die cut, so everything works out and fills in nicely. And this light gray is really just going to ground the whole thing. That is the whole purpose of it. This isn't meant to be a scene card, but I also don't want my trellis and my pots floating in outer space. So just put down that little bit of gray, blended it out with a much lighter gray. And then from there, I decided that I wanted further dimension with my trellis. I should have done this. This is just me being honest. I should have done this before I glued anything down, but I didn't know that I wanted to do it. So I added a little bit of shadow behind my trellis for the parts that are colored darker to be behind. I used the mid-tone. For the rest of the pieces to finish out kind of the triangle of it, I just use the lighter color, and all of my shadows are down and to the left. You want them all to be in the same place to look more realistic for how shadows actually lay. So if my light source is in the top right, all my shadows are down and to the left. And that helps just kind of pop it up and bring it forward. One of the last things I did was go in with a white gel pen. I added some dots to my hydrangeas just to act as highlights. And then I also added some further highlights to the center of the flowers along the top of the trellis, just like a little comma or a little dot, just to, bring something else to the table. And then the last thing I did was, of course, add my shimmer. This is the Nuvo shimmer pen. You could use the Wink of Stella, both are good. And then that's it. That's the whole card. So I hope that this made you feel a little bit less alone. I hope it taught you some things about stamping multiples, die cutting multiples, and that you're inspired to maybe give it a try. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.